Hey GOTA members, so we've made a couple transfer videos to post onto the YouTube channel. We just wanted to share some tips and tricks for how to keep your own body safe as well as helping your patient be successful with that transfer. So in this video, we're going to go over a slide board transfer, a squat pivot transfer, and a stand pivot transfer, as well as some tips and tricks for dependent transfers. So if you have any other transfers that you'd like us to cover, leave it in the comments and we'll try to make a video on that one as well.
So we're going to demonstrate how to do a basic slide board transfer from wheelchair to mat. Ideally, the clinician will be sitting down and their legs can provide support during the transfer. The first thing that we want to do is we're going to line our patient up. We always want to be going downhill if possible, so I'm going to lower the mat. And I'm going to line the wheelchair up to be at about a 30-degree angle. Now, oftentimes you have to take off your leg plates before then. Lock into place. Lock into place. Take off this footrest. You want to cue your patient to have scooted forward and have their feet flat on the floor. From here, we're going to take off the armrest. Actually, come on. Yeah, as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, I thought this one.
But also something that happens in real life all the time.
There we go. All right. If you cannot get a rolling chair, a lot of times I will teach people to kneel on the ground with one leg up. So that foot is again able to kind of push that patient over if they can't make it the full way. All right, so when we're using a slide board, we always want to put it under one thigh, and we want to cue the patient not to put their fingers through the holes. So we're going to slide into here and come back. Awesome. Kelsey's helping a lot. So oftentimes, though, you'll have to lean your patient forward over their knee and kind of onto your shoulder to get them there. From here, you want to cue your patient to have their head go the opposite way of their butt, and you're going to support underneath the thighs if they have the balance to do so. Kelsey's doing a great job. She has one hand very close to her butt on one side, and the other hand is leading in the direction she wants to go. The closer somebody's hand is to their butt, the more power they will have. Oftentimes, your patients will try to reach up here to push themselves over. You don't want them to do that because that's a lot of strain on the shoulder, and you're also decreasing their moment arm so they're not as strong. So you want to cue them to be down. So from here, I'm going to get nice and close. She's going to come over my shoulder, and we're going to cue to scoot over. And then one more, and one more. And ideally, the board should be used as a bridge that someone is doing little pops over, because the goal would be to get them to no longer need the board, to either do one large kind of pop over, or for that individual to slowly start transitioning into squat pivot and then stand pivot transfers. From here, Kelsey would lean onto one side to then get the board out from underneath her. Either your patient can do that, or you can help them with it. An important thing to note when you are using boards that have texture, you always want the texture to be going in the direction that the individual is going. The only exception would be if there is shower equipment, in which case this kind of textured part can actually wear out the equipment, so that's the only time that you would flip the other way. For this next demonstration, we're going to demonstrate a squat pivot transfer. Similar to the last video, we've already lined up our wheelchair at about a 30-degree angle or less to the surface that we're transferring to. If it's a mat, we want to have the mat equal to or slightly lower than the wheelchair that they're transferring from. I know most people are acquainted with gait belts. This one's much too large for Kelsey, really, but we want to keep in mind that it goes teeth side first. Keep it nice and low to the patient, ideally across kind of their belly button, and then underneath the opposite side. This one's for somebody who's bariatric, so we're going to make sure to tuck in the extra loop so Kelsey doesn't trip. Whenever patients ask me if these are actually necessary, I always tell them it's really not meant to be the part at which I lift you from. It's really supposed to be something that I grab onto instead of your arms if you start to fall. A gait belt isn't necessarily meant to really lift the full patient's weight up. You're doing that through therapeutic handling. A gait belt is really meant to prevent a clinician or a loved one from hurting their shoulders if they start to go down. Okay? From here, if we're doing a squat pivot transfer, I want to come nice and close to the patient. I want my legs to be kind of equal with theirs, so then I can actually block her knees if I need to.
In case there is.
Yep, in case she were to slip through. So we would make sure that our feet are all the way on the ground, that I'm blocking, and I'm coming nice and low. Just similar to the other transfer, she's coming with her head opposite the direction that her butt is heading. So from here, we're going up, and we're pivoting over. Ideally, the clinician is lifting from their legs and not their back or their shoulders.
So the next transfer we're going to go over is a stand pivot transfer. So we already have our setup of where we want to go. We're going to put our gait belt on so we're ready. Again, this gait belt is much too large. And then we want to make sure we have our brakes locked. And that's something you can start practicing with your patients too, that they know to lock the brakes. And then you're going to look around to see what else you have in your way that might get in the way of your transfer. So you might have a catheter bag or a Foley bag. So just thinking about where that is. If it was over on this side, then we might get tangled up. So getting that where it's hanging on the walker and free of the direction we're transferring. If you have an IV pole, if you had it over on this side, you have to think about what arm it's in. So if it's in this arm, and then we would put the pole so that there wouldn't be any lines or kinks in it as we're transferring. So if the pole or the IV was in this arm, then I want the pole to be over here because I'd want it where we're going to end up. So just taking the time to think through some of that before you do the transfer. And also where I'm going to be. So if I'm caught up in here or trying to transfer, I'm in her way of transferring. So with this transfer, she might be a little more independent and have more mobility. So I want to give her the armrest. And then the main thing I'm going to teach here is not to pull on the walker, because if she pulls back on that, we're just going to fall back into the chair. So having her either push with both hands from the wheelchair or have one hand on the walker. And then I'm here to support and also squatting lows. Gonna lift up. Good, then bring both hands to the walker and pivot those hips. Now my body's again close. We had our IV pull over here and then reach back and sit down. And that's the stand pivot. Okay, so we're gonna go over just a technique to use for sit to stands. This can help you have more control and better body mechanics, and also help the patient to activate the muscles that they need to for the actual stand. So it doesn't necessarily matter if you come to a full stand, but it's to practice that skill to get there. So we're gonna use just a draw sheet, which is usually pretty easy to find, and get it underneath her hips. So I'm gonna have Kristen lean side to side, lean towards me, and I'll feed the sheet through. If you're working from bed level, a lot of times it's somewhat under their hips already. I want to make sure it's good and secure under them, and then it gives me something to hold on to as we stand. I usually start in a seated position and then stand with them as we're standing up. So we're going to get their feet in a good spot where we're ready, and then we can push up to standing. And then lower back down. Good. So that's just one trick to kind of help you with someone that's a really heavy stand. All right, so we're gonna practice a dependent transfer for someone who's not able to help you transfer, but you need to get them to the other surface. So this transfer is easiest if you kind of hold their knees up. So I'm kind of cinching her knees in to hold her together. And then I'm using the weight of her body. So I want her head, again, facing the opposite direction so that I'm not fighting against where we're going.
Where do you typically tell your people to put their hands?
So it depends on what kind of movement they have in their hand, if they're, fixed or that kind of thing. I usually have them put them like on my shoulders, but not on my neck.
Sounds good.
Okay. Do Do you have another way?
No, that sounds good.
Yeah,
Just every
and-
clinician's different.
Yeah, and it depends on your own body mechanics too. That tends to work for me, and just making sure that their hands are there before I transfer, because if I do it after, they tend to grab for my neck. So I have them place their hands on my shoulders and lean forward, and then I'm pinching in, grabbing from their hips and scooting over.
I helped.
So probably because Kristen is so much taller than me, something I'd want to think about is having a tech or someone with me to transfer. So in that scenario, I would have led my tech to be behind them, so they would also have good reach and could lift to scoot.